testing this mic. Is the mic on? Is this on? No? I don't think I'm getting any sound. I'm not sure. 2. All right, oh, it works. That might be a little bit hot. No, it's not hot enough. How's that? Perfect? Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. This is the first time that we've had events in this space pre-grand opening, but it's the first time we've really had a panel with audience, and we're still figuring out the technology and the sound. So here we go. We'll work out the bumps as we go along. But thank you all. Welcome to our inaugural panel of the Mineta-Simpson Institute at Heart Mountain, or MSI as we're calling it. My name is Ara Sunata Newlin. I'm the executive director of the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation, and I'm reintroducing myself that way because we are live streaming this presentation. So hello to our live audience, some of whom are just in the other room, and some of whom might be elsewhere, and this will be recorded and available on our Heart Mountain YouTube channel. And thank you to the Wyoming Humanities for making this live stream possible. We have 5 institutions represented here, and in the next hour we'll be reflecting on how each of these institutions dovetails with the work of the Mineta-Simpson Institute and how we hope to sustain it. So speaking for the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation, we are in a brand new space. We have just celebrated the grand opening of the Mineta-Simpson Institute, and it is named in honor of our beloved Secretary Norman Mineta and Senator Alan Simpson. Briefly, they met as Boy Scouts here at the Heart Mountain concentration camp, where Norm was confined behind barbed wire. Al was a boy from Cody. They met at that time as Boy Scouts, and they reconvened as leaders of their respective parties in the U.S. Congress and the U.S. Senate, and all the way up from there. Ultimately, each of them, with Norm a liberal Democrat, Al a conservative Republican, each of them ultimately receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom from a president of the opposite party, and making their careers together based on a common respect. They had political differences, they had fierce differences, but they never let that get in the way of their love for each other, their respect for each other, and most of all, their commitment to our democracy and doing what's right for the people of America as a whole, more than the pressures that they felt from either one of their parties. And so it is in their spirit that we anoint this Mineta-Simpson Institute with our inaugural panel, and it is worth noting that in this space, named after these 2 incredible men who we love so much, our inaugural panel is a lineup of incredible women, which is fully in the spirit of all of our organizations. And Mineta-Simpson Institute is about bringing people together across differences and inspiring conversation that helps us see our commonalities rather than our differences. And it's about balancing out the narratives that we are used to. So I find it very appropriate that in this space named after 2 men, we start off our work with a panel of all women. Our panelists today are Dr. Anthea Hartig, the Elizabeth Macmillan Director of the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. Shelley C. Lowe. Okay. Shelley C. Lowe, the Chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And I'll actually... You can save your applause till the end. Ann Burroughs, President and CEO of the Japanese American National Museum. Go ahead and applaud. We got to applaud. And Dr. Deborah Kawahara, President-elect of the American Psychological Association. So, to me, the Mineta-Simpson Institute is about challenging ourselves to step out of our bubbles and to take the high road. And what does that mean? So stepping out of our bubbles tends to be harder, but ultimately more rewarding than isolating ourselves amongst like-minded people. You know, we grow by being around people who are not like us. And really that's what makes life rich, right? How boring would that be if we were all the same? It's not only not realistic, it's just not very much fun. So we are here to encourage people to step out of our comfort zones a little bit. It's also about taking the high road. What does that mean? For me, that means, again, it tends to be more difficult, but more rewarding than taking the easy way out and giving in to our instincts of self-preservation or doing things for political or personal gain instead of, in the words of Norma Mineta, doing what's right. These are, of course, daunting challenges. All of us could be better at them. They're not insurmountable challenges, and I like to think of these challenges not as a matter of something we can or can't do, but as a matter of habit. And if we can first recognize what our habits are, we can then embark on the difficult work of retraining ourselves. Deborah Kawahara is here from the American Psychological Association, and you know, the way that the brain works, we've learned that we can actually carve out new neural pathways to get ourselves, you know, to train our brains to think and act in different ways. And taking the high road, you know, we're here to carve out these new neural pathways so that taking the high road becomes a matter of habit. And once it's a habit, it's not that hard anymore. So the Mineta-Simpson Institute here, we envision this as a training ground for helping our community members, our educators, and our leaders create new habits. Our country needs an intervention, and we are offering the Mineta-Simpson Institute as one part of that intervention. So all of the institutions that are represented here are about storytelling, we are about community building, and we are about commitment to our country's lofty aspiration of liberty and justice for all. And so I'd like to ask each panelist to reflect on the same set of questions. I'd like to ask each of you to consider what tools you have in your institution's toolbox that can help advance these goals. And then I also invite you to comment on what you personally bring to this arena based on your own identity and your own personal and professional background. And so I'd like to invite first Dr. Anthea Hartig to come up to the podium.
Thank you so much, Ara. It's an honor, truly, to be here with you, especially in your newest role as Executive Director. And I extend my lasting gratitude to the Mineta-Simpson Institute, to the ancestors, and to those here now and in the future who will carry the vision of the Institute and its important work forward. Warmest welcomes, of course, to the Smithsonian family as one of our newest affiliate museums. We're thrilled to have you and honored. As we know, today we are collectively at the center of ongoing and intersecting crises. I could name them for us: environmental, constitutional, of course, still feeling the results of the pandemic, the racial and gun violence against AAPI communities, Native communities, other communities of color. We're experiencing grief, loss, and fear, and adding, of course, generational trauma and inherited memories. We are also, however, transponders, transporters, and vessels of resiliency, of hope, of joy. And I think you can certainly feel that in our last couple days together. Over the past 30 years, I have been so fortunate to work alongside colleagues from the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities, including the late Secretary Norman Y. Mineta. Together, we've learned, explored, revealed, and honored the complicated legacies surrounding, of course, especially the incarceration of Japanese American in concentration camps in the United States. It's been one of the most humbling experiences of my public history career to work in these fields, from everywhere from the Harada House in Riverside, Southern California, to the Minidoka Camp in rural South Central Idaho, and now at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, which I am humbled every day to say is the largest history museum on United States history in the world, and you can also think of it as the world's largest US history classroom. We'll welcome about 3 million people this year into the building and about 12 million people online. So bearing witness to these places, to Heart Mountain in particular this week, to advocate, to preserve and interpret them continues to bring me such joy and honor. At the museum, we have been so fortunate for the last 20 years to work with the Japanese American community through our annual Day of Remembrance program. Partners, of course, like our brethren at the Smithsonian and the Asian Pacific American Center, from the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum, the support, of course, of the Japanese Memorial Foundation, the Japanese American Citizens League, both DC and national. So many others have made this work meaningful and possible for us. We have a Japanese American History Endowment that has many dedicated supporters, and I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the devotion of my longtime colleague at the museum, Noriko Sanjifuji, who's right back there and joining us today. At the nation's flagship history museum, our mission is to empower people to create a more just and compassionate future by exploring, preserving, and sharing the complexities of our past. We see public history as a critical educational and civic component to our democratic society. As we know, learning history helps us understand that today's world was not inevitable, but the result of a myriad of choices and actions made by individuals and communities. And we remain deeply committed to sharing this, the Heart Mountain experience, as a crucial part of America's long past with generations to come. One of the tools, and I'm so grateful for Ara's question to really get us thinking about what we can share today, is our new Center for Restorative History. It spotlights the people and the stories that have been excluded, to your point, Mr. Honda, from our national narrative using the principles of restorative justice. It partners with communities across the country to resist these exclusions. And restorative history is a method and a practice and a theory, and it leverages understanding the past to get to the root harm of what was done, the injustices that were created. It asks those who were harmed, like we're asking today, what are your needs? What are our obligations at the Smithsonian and to each other to meet those needs? And how do we understand those root causes of harm, past and present? And I see the work that you're doing here, the museum, the institute, as working to exemplify this restorative practice. And as we like to say, just doing the history, telling the stories, is an act of activism all unto its own. One of the first things we did at the Center for Restorative History was went down to Tallahatchie County, Mississippi, and together with the Tallahatchie Emmett Till Commission, established in 2006, retraced young Emmett Till's fateful journey that summer of 1955. The local community, very small, Sumner, Mississippi, so it's about less than 5,000 people, put up markers to tell where young Emmett had been, including along the site from which his body, badly, of course, tortured and murdered body, was retrieved from the river. They put up 4 signs. These are just kind of simple markers, like we would know, like a historic marker. We sat with them for a couple years to collect the second sign that has 317 bullet marks in it. This process of collecting and conserving and exhibiting now, we're exhibiting for the second time. I'm going back to Washington, actually, to welcome descendants of Emmett Till's family. We're kind of connecting Chicago and Mississippi together this week. But we worked with the residents like you are working here with descendants and local communities. What themes did they want presented? How do we co-curate together? How do we use the history of the pursuit of justice from the community to help tell the stories in a national museum? It has been a true honor, of course, to collect that marker, and I hope that you can all come and see it, and if not, our digital response to it is a beautiful set of stories online as well. So what's the correlation between a project like the Emmett Till story in collecting that and our work around Japanese American incarceration? So oftentimes when we look to the past, we're cautioned, don't bring our present day judgments there. And of course, it's a good thing to be mindful of. We should always try and find the door at which we'll check our personal biases and our modernized contexts. But in looking at the events like jailing 120,000 persons of Japanese descent, mostly American citizens, we need to be reminded that the historical record consists not of ideas that were popular, but those that were not. There were individuals, groups, and organizations that held a variety of opinions. Even back then, there were those who believed that incarceration was gravely wrong. And of course, in the 1944 landmark case, Korematsu versus United States, which upheld incarceration by 6-3 vote, we also, I think, as Karen so helps us remember every day, should remember and try and be a part of the minority. And of course, Justice Frank Murphy's dissent is as clear in its ringtones as it was 80 years ago. He wrote, I dissent, therefore, from this legalization of racism. Racial discrimination in any form and in any degree has no justifiable part whatsoever in our democratic way of life. All residents of this nation are kin in some way, by blood or by culture, to a foreign land, and yet they are primarily and necessarily a part of the new and distinct civilization of the United States, end quote. He, of course, excluded others in his statement as well. So we find in the folds of history, if you will, the resonance that we need to help us understand today. What parts of the past then speak clearly to us? What are the threads from long ago that continue to have hold on us today that we either can't let go of or that we need to weave into a new fabric of justice? The origins, of course, of Japanese American incarceration were anti-Chinese exclusion, the genocide of Native peoples, the extension really that you can see through 1955 and the lynching of Emmett Till. The communities, of course, have long documented and memorialized their experiences long before external organizations like the one I'm honored to run did so. Excuse me. One last pathway, of course, to how we bear witness is through collecting. I'm just going to grab my water. Excuse me. We have been so honored to collect deeply in the Japanese American experience, both through camp, everything from Henry Sugimoto's oils from the Jerome, Arkansas camp, including modern day collecting throughout Asian American and Pacific Island heritage and communities. One of my most favorites was a banner marched in the streets of Chinatown before the pandemic was declared. So this is on February 29th, 2020. Fight the virus, not the people. We can see a long, of course, and powerful trend in the ways in which our work together intersects. One of my favorite moments from that complicated year of 2020 was standing with David Inouye and so many others in front of the non-scalable black fence around Lafayette Square, north of the White House, where through the incredible project Zero for Solidarity, now in the National Collection is a beautiful 2 strings of beautiful cranes representing that compassion representing that understanding of what was happening along the southern border and to Japanese Americans was happening again. We've been honored to do an incredible series of programmings. Also that year, that incredibly complicated year of 2020, Viral Histories, Stories of Racism, Resilience, and Resistance in Asian American Communities, which was a 4-day digital conversation. And I hope that you have had a chance to see come through Asian Pacific American Voices at the Smithsonian, which is this year is a 5-part video series featuring behind-the-scenes showcases of stories and people, objects that shape the Asian American and Pacific Islander narratives at the museum. David Mineta shared yesterday those feelings and words that come to mind when we're on this hallowed and sacred ground. Honor, privilege, humility, resilience, commitment to honor Alan Norm, which sounds funny, Senator Simpson and Secretary Mineta, to be unafraid to get in the real and the metaphorical pup tents, to defend each other's constitutional and human rights, to uphold each other's dignity, to share each other's stories with respect, and commit to unwavering allyship. It remains a lasting, humble honor and a privilege to be with you today for the opening of this Dream Institute atop a place of suffering and loss at a time when people and our Constitution need defending more than ever. Thank you. And sorry about the smoke-filled asthmatic girl from Southern California there. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hartig. And also thank you for that reminder that the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation is now a Smithsonian affiliate. As is the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. And I just love this idea when we were visiting ahead of time. You said, you know, the Mineta-Simpson Institute is really like, we are all in this pup tent. We are sitting together, you know, across differences, across different backgrounds. This is the pup tent, and amazing things can happen in that kind of a space. All right, next I'd like to invite Shelley Lowe, Chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities, up to the podium. I'll note that both the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation and the Japanese American National Museum have benefited tremendously from NEH funding through our teacher workshops and more. And I would also like to recognize that Chair Lowe is the first Native American woman to chair this organization.
Good afternoon, everybody. You know, we were telling her she couldn't get this up too high, but she did okay. We're okay. No, we're fine. We'll see how they do. That's right. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Yat she Shelley Lowe Yanashia, Belagana Neshlin, Anastasia Tachini Bashachi, Belagana Dashache, do Trabaha Dashanala, Lo Kantiel de Nasha, do Washington Dishagan. My name is Shelley Lowe. I'm Navajo. I'm originally from Ganado, Arizona, in Northeast Arizona. I am chair of the National Endowment for Humanities, and I live and work in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to start a little bit by talking about the second kind of question. My personal background and how do I come into this work. As was mentioned, I'm the first Native American to chair the National Endowment for the Humanities, second woman, and the woman who chaired it before me has some history here in Wyoming, but I'll let you look that up. And I think she was supposed to be, her mother was supposed to be speaking today, or her daughter was supposed to be speaking today, sorry. She did speak? Yes, yes. Well, anyway. So I come into this position. I grew up in Arizona on the Navajo Reservation, and I grew up, you know, learning American history, the American history that we kind of all have learned. And I went to college, and there were all kinds of things all of a sudden I figured out I had never known before. And I was like, what is going on? I don't understand. And it wasn't that I didn't know a lot of things. The more shocking thing was how many people didn't know about me and my tribe and reservations, and the fact that Native people are still in this country, right? That they were all taught that Native people are no longer here. And it was a shock to me. And some of the more shocking things were to learn things about Japanese internment camps. And I grew up in Arizona, and there were Arizona camps. Never was told once that these things were happening in our history. And I'll get even a little bit more personal. When I was in college, there was this really cute guy. He was Navajo, and we were in a Navajo language class together, but he couldn't speak Navajo, and I had never met a Navajo who couldn't speak Navajo. And I was like, what is wrong with this guy? My friend from high school said, oh, I was in an English class with him. He's from Parker. I'm like, where's Parker? I don't know what that is. So he grew up actually right outside Poston. And he's Colorado River Indian tribes. Well, anyway, we got married, and we have... We had 3 kids, but as I was going through college, I was learning about these internment camps, and he said to me one day, oh yeah, they have those right by our house. And I was like, what? They have them in Arizona? And it was just like so shocking to be like, it was right there next door this whole time. And to be kind of like, how do we not know this? How were we not told this? And then I learned that I would drive in and out and through Gila River Reservation. And then I learned there were internment camps there. And it was just such a shock to say, I thought we were an educated country, and I don't know these things. We are not married anymore, by the way. It's okay. So I come through it kind of weaving in and out, right? Like we're so tied to some of this history sometimes in ways that we didn't know, in ways that we didn't realize. And the worst thing about that is there are so many people who are tied to this history who are not aware of it now. And that's a problem for me, and that is something that I want to change. So we're the National Endowment for Humanities. We are the federal funding agency that funds humanities programs across the United States. We were developed, we were brought forward or birthed and brought in 1965 along with the National Endowment for the Arts. And in our founding legislation, there are the words that democracy demands wisdom. And this is kind of our charge at NEH. Democracy demands wisdom, right? It doesn't say democracy demands monuments. It doesn't say democracy demands libraries or information. It's democracy demands wisdom. And the wisdom part for me is what's important in humanities, because we can have all of this information, but we have to be wise and we have to learn and we have to develop that wisdom about what this information means. So the biggest thing that I have a challenge with is defining humanities for the public. So I come in, yeah, we do humanities. And everyone's like, cool. And then people are like, what is that? I don't know what that is. And it's defined actually in our founding legislation. It's things like history, literature, archaeology, philosophy, ethics, right? All of those things that people take in college or do in school. But to me, I said, I was trying to figure out how do I define humanities. Humanities to me is creation stories. And tribal people, our creation stories are very important. They teach us who we are. They teach us who we're supposed to be. They teach us how we have relationships with one another. They teach us how we have relationships with the land and the environment. They teach us what is important and what we need to teach our children and how we treat our elders. Creation stories are all humanities. And this institute has a creation story, a very, very, very important creation story that has so many values, so many teachings that has to be continued forward. So at NEH, one of our biggest goals is to, one, create wisdom, right? And how do we do that? By being able to answer questions. So we make sure that we have funding for research, for public programs, for preserving materials, archives, for education programs, so that when you have a question about what is going on, what is happening, especially when it comes to how things that are happening to us as a democracy, as a country, as human beings, we have access to the answers, that the information is there. NEH is here to ensure the information is there, it is accessible, that you can get to it, you can answer your questions. But not just that we can answer questions today, right? We need to be able to answer questions in 250 years, in 500 years. And our goal is to make sure everything we need to answer those questions is available. But there are different ways that we can do that. I said last night, it's easy to answer the who, the what, the when, the where. The difficult questions to answer are how and why. Why did this happen? How did this come to be? And those are the hard questions, because when we dig in and try to find out those answers, we are confronted with sometimes very, very difficult histories, very difficult stories. Many people don't want to be confronted with those difficulties. I don't want to face that. I don't want to think about that. I had the opportunity to see the rest of the building today, right before this, and a woman came to us, and her mother was here. Her mother's now will be 102. Her mother's never come back. She doesn't want to come back. She doesn't want to be confronted with it. And that's really hard, right? It's hard to say, yes, I'm going to face that. Yes, I'm going to hear that. Yes, I'm going to understand that. Yes, I'm going to tell that. But that's where we come back to the humanities. Humanities, to me, is what gives us the opportunity to pause, to say, okay, this is hard, but we can do it. And then humanities tools allow us to have the strength and the courage to do that difficult work. And I said last night, this is exactly what the Mineta-Simpson Institute will be doing the difficult work, answering the how, answering the why. Some of the things that we do at NEH, we have a new initiative called American Tapestry. It's weaving together past, present, future. And it's really talking about how do we address our history? How do we think about it today? How do we think about it for what we need for the future? But for me, it's not just weaving those three things together. To me, it's weaving the thread of Native history with Japanese American history, with Mexican American history, with Chinese American history. Because those are some of the most beautiful strands in our tapestry, but they've been left out of it. They haven't been included in that tapestry that we call America. And we have to be able to bring those back in. Because just think, I tell people I've traveled all over the country and I see such beautiful people, such beautiful spaces and places. And I hear such beautiful stories. And I tell everybody, we are such a great country because we have all these diverse stories. But we have to start coming together to weave them together and to tell those stories and to move it forward. So we're very excited to be able to do that. I do want to also acknowledge some of this work that we do this through competitive national grants, but we do this also through our state and jurisdictional humanities councils. So I want to acknowledge Sean Reese and some of the staff who are here. And Sean has been a big supporter of the Mineta-Simpson Institute as well. And these are our partners on the ground. They receive a portion of our funding that we get from Congress, and they do the important work in the communities, the work that the communities need to have and need to see. And we're just so delighted to be able to be here visiting with you, but also visiting with our Humanities Council. And I want to acknowledge that twice we have funded the Japanese American National Museum for teacher education programming on Little Tokyo. So some of the work that we do is trying to ensure that when we do tell these stories, when we have the resources, we're putting them into the right places where that information can be shared. And this is exactly what JANM has done. This is exactly what Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation has done. We have funded them 3 times to do teacher education workshops, right? To bring this forward so that they can go back into their classrooms, they can teach this. Not just teach it the right way, right? Part of doing humanities work is making sure we do it the right way. And who needs to do that? The people that are part of that history, the people that are whose stories we're actually talking about. So it's my goal to ensure that as we do this work, those people are a part of it and leading it, and being the voices that say, this is what our history is, this is where we need to go. I want to also say this morning I went to the root cellar, and it's very dusty in there. There's this There's this really funky old car that has no engine whatsoever in there. But there was a woman with us, Miss Linda. And Miss Linda had been a child here. And she said, I'd never seen the root cellar before. So we were talking with her, and she said, when we left, my mother did not want to go to Chicago. She said, we're going to Denver. So they went to Denver, and that's where they stayed. And I said, when did you go to Denver? And she said, I don't know, 44, 45. And I got on my phone, and I texted my auntie. And I said, Auntie, when did Grandma and Grandpa go to Denver? She said, 1945, 44, 40, 45, 46. My uncle, my aunt, my father were born in Denver. My grandparents on my father's side were a young married couple, and they chose to leave the reservation to go to Denver. Because I don't know if many of you know, the federal government also had the Indian Relocation Program, which actually officially started after my grandparents went to Denver. But they were encouraging young Native families to move into urban areas. They were promising jobs and housing and resources. And they were put on buses, and they were sent to these cities, and there was nothing there for them. No resources, no jobs, and they had to figure out how to live and how to build families. My father's family didn't stay. They came back to the reservation when my father was very young. But I was, in my head, I think, I bet Linda and my grandparents, her parents and my grandparents, they had to have crossed paths at some point, trying to find a way to live in an urban area after everything has been changed and, sometimes taken away from you. So if you see Linda, maybe we have crossed paths, or my grandparents have crossed paths with her parents. I want to leave with one final note. I want to go back to my Konda as well. This is a celebration of a love story, right? We love our families. We love our communities. We love our tribes, right? We learned from Denny that spouses love each other. But when I talk to people about doing humanities work is an act of love. It's love for your community, love for your history, and love for your future. So we'll talk more, but thank you so much. We're so delighted to be here.
Humanities work is an act of love. Yes. All right, Ann Burrows, a dear friend and colleague to many of us. We're thrilled to have you here. I'll say that she's the president and CEO of the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles, or JANM. We have a strong partnership between Heart Mountain and JANM. Ann is actually on our Heart Mountain Board of Directors. Our own vice chair, Doug Nelson, is on JANM's Board of Governors. And I'd also like to give a shout out to the Japanese American Confinement Sites Consortium that brings in all of our different sites that we've worked on together for over the years. So Ann, please come to the podium.
Thank you, Aura. Thank you. Gosh, humanities are love. Humanities is love. What an incredible thought. I think I'm going to start by just saying how incredibly moved and how incredibly emotional I feel to be in the space with the Mineta family and with the Simpson family and with the entire Heart Mountain family. Shortly after I started at the museum, the first concentration camp that I came to was Heart Mountain. And I think it was in my first year or my second year, I was asked to do the keynote address at Heart Mountain. And, when I look back on that time now, I realize just how extraordinarily ill-prepared I was to do that. Because I talked about myself, I talked about democracy, I talked about my history, and I tried to talk about Japanese American history, and I tried to talk about how that fits into the larger context of this country. And as I was thinking about what I was going to say now, I thought, well, perhaps I'd better go back to the notes that I wrote all those years ago, in case somebody remembers enough the mistakes that I made. But I look at that now, and I realize how much I've learned. And I realize how much I've learned being the CEO of Janum, and I realize how much I've learned from all of you, and the incredible and the deep partnerships and the incredible love in this community. And I am so incredibly indebted, and I will always be indebted to Norm for the partnership that we've had and the friendship that we had. And he was chair of the board for the last 6 years of his life, so my first 6 years at Janum. So every Friday I would have these 2-hour conversations with him. It was supposed to be about what was happening at Janum, but it was really a masterclass in leadership and humanity and integrity. And all of those things are bottled right here. And that's also infused with the incredible vision and love of Al, and just their friendship and their love for each other. So I'm also going to flip the question and just sort of talk about my own history a little bit, because those who know me know that I don't like to do it very much. So I'd just rather get it out of the way. But it's probably important because it tells you who I am and why I got to where I am and how it shaped the choices that I've made. So you all hear I have a South African accent. I grew up in South Africa at the time during the apartheid government, at the time when South Africa was the most segregated country in the world, and I grew up as a child of incredible privilege, and my only connection with people of color were as the people who worked as servants in my parents' home in my incredibly privileged world. Fast forward some years, when I became a student, I got very involved in the anti-apartheid movement, and for my pains, progressively more and more involved over the years. And then finally, in 1986, I'd been arrested several times, and then in 1986, I was arrested, and I was held as a political prisoner, detention without trial, which meant that due process was suspended. And I was essentially awaiting trial, awaiting charge, because the South African government wanted a show trial, a treason trial. So my life would have been very different had they been successful, if they had been able to bring the charges against me, because the stakes at that time were incredibly high. However, I was lucky enough to be adopted by Amnesty International as a prisoner of conscience. And there was a massive campaign for my release from detention. And so when I came to this country a few years later, my first job was with Amnesty International, and I was to work with them for 9 years. I took a bit of a walkabout because of burnout, but I came back to Amnesty as chair of the board of Amnesty in the US, and it was a role that I served on with great honor. I didn't serve with honor, I was honored to serve. And then I was elected as one of the global chairs of the international movement, which I did for 3 years. So by way, long explanation to say that experience was formative for me, and that is the experience that has shaped who I am, all the choices that I've made, the path that I've taken. And the other thing which is important for your history, and it's also something that we don't talk about much in South Africa, but during the Anglo-Boer War at the end of the 1800s, the over 50,000 South Africans, both white and black, were incarcerated, rounded up and incarcerated in concentration camps, British concentration camps. It was the first time that they'd been used to scale. They'd previously been used in Cuba by the Spanish. And I had probably, one of my family members counted up, probably about 87 of my ancestors who died in those camps. So coming to Janum, seeing those photographs and seeing one small mention on a slide, an interpretive slide somewhere, about South Africa's concentration camps, there's a great affinity there. So Janum and Heart Mountain have this incredible connection. Obviously, it's a connection through the history. It's a connection through the vision of our founders, which is exactly the same as the vision of the founders for Janum, that there would be this place that would always remember the stories, remember the histories, preserve the objects and the artifacts. But not just as an obligation to history, but to ensure that what happened to Japanese Americans would never happen to anybody else again. So it was this deep obligation to history to use those lessons, to shine the lessons of history on the present. So that is very much, that was our genesis. And then Janum opened on the day that the Los Angeles riots started in April 1992. So that was the birthing for Janum. So our history came from this moment of incredible injustice. Our birthing was at this time of this paroxysm, racial paroxysm in our city. But our future, our trajectory, was shaped by what came after the riots, and which was shaped by visionaries like Irene Hirano, people on our board who saw that for a museum to be a true community museum, a museum that would be able to celebrate the stories and reflect the diversity of the community, not just the Japanese American community, but the community of Los Angeles, that Janum had to be a different museum. So that was where, that was the impetus, and that was our trajectory. And that is something that we've always felt incredibly deeply. So we have the shared vision. We have the shared history. We have this continuum of these extraordinary giants, Norm, Senator Daniel Inouye, Irene Hirano, who was so pivotal, Shirley's mother, Doug, who's so pivotal in forming and growing our two institutions. So I came to Janum in 2016, and this goes to the question of the tools that we have to share in common. I came to Janum in 2016 in the run-up to the election, and you will all remember how contentious that was. But there was something that happened in that election, and it was there were people in one of the campaigns who was talking about using the Japanese American incarceration as a precedent for what to do with Muslim Americans and what to do with immigrants in this country and illegal immigrants in this country. And I remember Norm, in one of our incredible calls, he said, it's time for Janum to find its voice. It's time for Janum to use the history, to shine a light on the imperfect presence, but most importantly, to shape a future. So how do we do that? So we had this extraordinary building at Janum called the National Center for the Preservation of Democracy, which was Senator Inouye's vision. It was his brainchild. He found the money. He got the money to found it. And it was the idea to have people understand democracy, to have people understand how they themselves could shape democracy. But we knew that we needed to give it new life. So we were looking at what was happening in 2016, 2017. We did an enormous amount of research, an enormous amount of listening, and fast forward to our launch at the end of last year. So we've relaunched our National Center for the Preservation of Democracy. We've named it for the senator. We have the pavilion of our museum on the one side. On the other side of our Norman Mineta Democracy Plaza is our Democracy Center, our National Center for the Preservation of Democracy, because we see that continuum as being so incredibly powerful. Because for us at the museum, you can't think about the present without understanding the past. And that's something that all historians understand. Because if you're going to use history to show the relevance of the stories, if you're going to be able to use history to show the urgency of the present, then you have to be able to understand that. So we asked ourselves a series of questions. First of all, how do we as a museum, what is our role in democracy? And Anthea and I were just at a conference recently in DC, which looked at exactly that question. But we had some very early questions about that. You know, in years gone past, museums didn't quite rise to the level as being the most trusted institutions in the country. It was the media, it was universities, it was the teachers, it was the doctors in schools, but now it's museums. Museums are the #1 institutions in the country that people trust the most. So how do we as a museum, how can we uplift issues of democracy? And we realized that we can't do it by providing answers, but it's rather how we provoke questions. How do we create safe spaces for dialogue? How do we create safe spaces for civic engagement? How do we build community? How do we provide spaces where we can have those courageous conversations about difficult institutions. How do we center art? How do we place art at the center of our institutions, at the center of our conversations, at the center of our story? Because we know that it's art, almost more than anything else, and the stories themselves that inspire action, empathy, and participation. And also, very importantly, can reshape the narrative of a community and can reshape the representation of a community. So those were extraordinarily important for us as we were thinking about our Democracy Center. Also, how do we uplift diverse heritage and cultures and the stories that were brought here? Because we knew that going forward, we would always be a place that would commemorate the history. But for us to live and to be sustainable, we knew that we needed to be able to tell the stories of everybody. We knew that we needed to be a place where everybody could come to see their own stories reflected, their own immigrant pathways. We also knew that we wanted to be a place where people would bring stories, where our Democracy Center would be a place where we'd talk about the stories, not to replace a dominant culture, but to enhance it, to strengthen it, to make room for other stories that create a true American canon, where people can see themselves reflected in the arts and the civic life. So our tool, our major tool, I think we have already such a deep partnership with Heart Mountain. We share collections, we share exhibitions, we share stories. You know, Shirley and I have sort of been joined at the hip through thick and thin almost from the very beginning. But institutionally, and so many of you in this room are JANM members, so many of our folks, you know, are JANM, our Heart Mountain people. So for us, it's an easy jump, and it's not a hard thing for us. You know, JANM is a place of hope and reconciliation and optimism. So is Heart Mountain. There is enormous power of place here, and I don't need to tell you why, because that's what we've gathered for. JANM also has enormous power of place. On our plaza, on the Mineta Democracy Plaza, 37,000 members of LA's Japanese American families were forced to board the buses that would take them onto the incarceration. So we feel we also have this enormous power of place. So it's an easy thing for us. It's an easy thing for us to think about because we share the same DNA. And it's an easy thing for us to sort of put our arms together, hold hands, and to move forward with these incredible giants whose shoulders we stand on, and know how we can continue to uplift each other and uplift the work that we do. So I could go on, but I know I will get the hook if I do. But what a privilege it's been here and to be in this space, and wow. What an amazing panel. Thank you so much.
Provoking questions, not providing answers. Yes, that's what we want to be doing in this space. And I'm gathering these tools myself here, like as we strategize, what kinds of programs will we have here in this new space? Everything that you all are saying are things that will be, you know, helping us shape what happens here. All right, Dr. Deborah Kawahara, President-elect of the American Psychological Association. Heart Mountain has collaborated with both the Wyoming Psychological Association and the American Psychological Association on several programs. I want to give a big shout out to Shirley Ann Higuchi, our board chair, who's, you know, when she's not working for Heart Mountain, her day job is actually with the APA. And so there are so many levels of connection here, and I will note that Deborah is the first Asian American woman to be president of the APA in its 132-year history. We are thrilled that you're here. Come on up to the podium. I don't want to steal her thunder, but Deborah is also a Heart Mountain descendant. You're not. Just kidding. I'll let her share her history.
Thank you so much. And first, I wanted to start off in thanking the Mineta, Senator Mineta and his family, Senator Simpson and his family, the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation board and staff. You know, even though I'm standing here by myself up here and I'm a little nervous, I know that I'm here standing on the shoulders of many people who have made this possible. And I think I want to make sure to acknowledge all those people that have worked so hard for this important institute that is now being open today. It is such an important and critical institute that is so needed today while we see the divisiveness in our country. So what I wanted to do is actually, a really strong value of mine is the personal is political. And I actually think Senator Simpson and Senator Mineta brought that to life. And I think that it is something that I live by in terms of my career. I had a chance to come here on Tuesday afternoon, and it was empty, more empty that afternoon, and it was very solemn and solitary. And the weight of the experiences as I walked through the different exhibits were very heavy. That experiential emotion that hit me is the very thing that we teach therapists in terms of being able to connect with clients, that it's not just the cognitive part, it's the emotional part. And I think that's the part that has to be included as we teach these histories, as we relay these stories, as we try to get our country to be able to talk to each other again. We have to see each other's as human, and we have to have humanity for each other. Bell Hooks talks about loving each other. I think unless we have the love for each other, it's gonna be very hard for us to talk about those difficult issues we face as a country and to bring us together as one. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got here, because really, I think it's incredible that I'm standing here amongst this phenomenal panel. For those of you that know the South Bay area of Los Angeles, I grew up in Gardena. So some of you might say, oh, she's a Gardena girl. I'm not. But Gardena it was a city when I was growing up. It was heavily populated with Japanese Americans. And so I had the good fortune of being in a community where I saw city council people, I saw leaders, I saw teachers. I just saw people that looked like me, that had similar background from me, be in those leadership positions. So I grew up feeling like, or believing, you could do anything you wanted. You could be the president of the United States if you wanted to. And I think that incubation of those formative years probably changed me in terms of believing that I could do leadership. I could do what I wanted. And not all my peers when I went to college actually had that same experience. Many of them came from communities where they were a minority. And I didn't really understand that experience until I went to college and started feeling like a minority. It's like, okay, this is what they're talking about. Being an ethnic minority, maybe not being included and belonging. And I started, taking Asian American Studies classes. I started getting involved. And that's where kind of this young, idealistic undergraduate decided I wanted to make a difference in the world. I wanted to change things and make them right for people. I wanted to make it right for everybody. And so I had decided that I would go into psychology and I could blend Asian American Studies with psychology. And my goal was to actually go into community mental health, where I could help underrepresented and underserved communities. I didn't end up there, though. I actually ended up in academics. But interestingly, my values prompted me in a certain direction. So in graduate school, I actually started doing research on the generational impact of children of incarcerated people. And really, one person that's a prolific scholar in this area is Dr. Donna Nagata. And that's who prompted me to do more research in this area. And as a psychologist, I really feel one of the things, the mission of the American Psychological Association is utilizing our psychological science and knowledge to better society and improve lives. And I believe that research is a way that you can be an activist. It's a way that policy makers will listen because it shows data. It shows impact. And then that can change their views about what they're gonna proceed with. And so lots of the experiences that I heard this weekend in terms of parents not talking about their experience, that the internment was just a point of reference, like, oh, I knew that person in camp, but they would not talk about their experience. But their kids knew this was something big that happened in their lives, but they knew not to talk to their parents about it, that somehow they knew it was hard, it was painful. And that was something that was found out from the children. And the other part was the ethnic identity that was impacted because of the internment. Many of the generation after the incarceration found that their parents pushed them to even be more American. And so you saw them assimilating, not acculturating. Assimilating is being just going towards the dominant culture. Acculturation is trying to integrate both your culture of origin and the culture that you immigrate to. Well, because of the internment or incarceration, parents were saying, be American, show them that you're American. So that in itself is gonna then change the trajectory of generations to come. And so one of the things that psychology is doing is actually doing research on the generational impact so that it doesn't get dismissed as this is just part of their community. It actually is because of this historical trauma that the community has endured and then has transformed what then is the identity and also the community cohesiveness or lack thereof. So I know that the American Psychological Association has just come out with a special issue on dismantling racism. And in that special issue, they have various groups talking about the ways in which they know that they can dismantle racism within our field as well as beyond. And we know that scholarship is one way of educating people. The American Psychological Association has 150,000 members. So that's a lot of people we're educating on this stuff, yeah? So very important. One of the things I'm gonna give a shout out to Aura. I'm an editor of a journal, Women in Therapy, and Aura was able to talk about Asian American feminist activism. And so not only is the scholarship really important, but whenever we get in positions that we utilize it to educate others or to utilize the power that we have so that we can bring it up to the surface. And that's very much what I try to do when I get in leadership positions. The second thing I wanted to just talk about in terms of tools that we have as a field is really part of, I'm a clinical psychologist, which means I engage in mental health services. But one of the things that you learn is listening skills. And I think this is one of the tools that will be very important whether we're doing, there's a whole bunch of different names, courageous conversations, difficult dialogues, healing circles. You're going to need listening skills. And I'm going to say just 3 things that I think are major ingredients that will need to be there in order for you to really have an honest, open, and a transformative dialogue. The first is connection. Like I talked about before, you have to see that other person as human, as we're in this together. You know, I love and care about you as much as you will care about me. So if you're happy, I'm happy. If you're sad, I'm sad, right? That you're going to be impacted that way because you care about me, right? If you see them as an object, it's going to be easy to dismiss them or to just say, I just don't agree with them. I don't want to hear what they have to say, right? And that's where stereotypes can start getting integrated into your thinking. So that's the first. The second is wanting to understand and have intellectual curiosity when you're engaged in that dialogue, okay? And what that means is you're going to be willing to give up the beliefs that you hold when you're going into that conversation, right? That maybe they bring up something that makes you rethink what you're thinking, and that you're going to be open to that, and you're going to be vulnerable to maybe I wasn't thinking about this correctly, right? And then the third is empathy. Empathy means perspective taking, that you can understand being in that person's shoes, understand and feel their experience. And I think if we can really learn these listening skills, I think we could get that much farther with each other and work collaboratively with each other on these difficult social issues that our country faces right now. So what I'd like to do is end on what I wrote in terms of when I ran for APA president, because I think it's really relevant to the Mineta-Simpson Institute. And I think it is a spirit that is here. And what I wrote was that, and I'm going to say the Institute, is deeply motivated in collectively creating inclusive spaces and policies where people feel valued, worthwhile, and are treated with respect and dignity. And I hope that we are able to make that a reality here. Thank you.
Does it still work? What a perfect point to end on. Thank you so much. What an incredible panel. Give them another round of applause. We're already a little over time, but we're going to finish now with a presentation by Deborah, and I'd like to invite Dr. Jared Skillings up to the stage as well, and Shirley for a photo op, and I will let you explain what this is. And I don't know who else do you want? And maybe maybe over here on this side of the.
Well, is she going to read it?
Yes. I have to read it, so.
Okay.
You
why
hold it.
don't we get in front of the podium? Is that possible?
Yeah. That's You want to do that?
Yeah, that way.
Because I can't read that. That's too small. Okay. 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 So today, on behalf of the American Psychological Association, I am honoring the Mineta-Simpson Institute at Heart Mountain with a presidential citation. And I'm going to read the citation. The Mineta-Simpson Institute at Heart Mountain is awarded a presidential citation for its emergence as a leader in developing empathy, courage, and cooperation in the next generation of American leaders. The Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation opened the Institute at its annual 2024 pilgrimage located on the site where over 10,000 Japanese Americans were held against their will during World War II for the crime of looking like the enemy. Secretary Norman Y. Mineta and Senator Alan K. Simpson witnessed firsthand what happened at Heart Mountain in 1942, and they understood the damage that can happen to a group of American citizens when our constitutional rights are disregarded. The two men met at Heart Mountain as young boys when Norm was incarcerated behind barbed wire, and Al was part of a Boy Scout troop who entered the camp for a jamboree. Mineta was elected as the first Asian American mayor of San Jose, while Simpson served in the Wyoming House of Representatives. Both moved to the halls of Congress in Washington, D.C., where Mineta served as a U.S. representative for California for 20 years, the Secretary of Commerce for a Democratic president, and the Secretary of Transportation for a Republican president. Meanwhile, Simpson served 3 terms as a senator from Wyoming and sat on multiple bipartisan commissions. The need to build bridges and connections between differing opinions has never been greater than at this time in history. The Institute will accomplish its goals through workshops for educators and leaders and books, podcasts, films, and videos that will be distributed around the world. The Institute's work will be aimed at improving civil discourse, building alliances, and advancing social justice. The facility will also host lectures. Sorry. Okay, now. And feature artists and their work to develop empathy between disparate parties and create a shared understanding of history. The Mineta-Simpson Institute is located on the site of the award-winning Heart Mountain Interpretive Center, a Smithsonian affiliate, and will be accessible to many in the community and nationwide. In recognition of their tireless efforts involved in promoting this change, the American Psychological Association honors the Mineta-Simpson Institute with this presidential citation, acknowledging the work that needs to be completed to create a more harmonious climate in America today. Spearheading a new approach in interpersonal engagement and in conjunction with strong and ethical leadership, the Institute exemplifies the highest ideals supported by the American Psychological Association. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you.